My husband, Jesse, 31, has been bringing home meals that his female coworker, Nellie, cooks for him. Now, I'm not the best cook and Jesse's made it clear, but he still eats what I cook every day. What I noticed with Nellie was that she tends to take every opportunity to point out how weak and tasteless my cooking is. Jesse would say nothing except steer the conversation towards something else they both relate to while I'm sitting there wallowing in my misery thinking about what she just said. Also, she once asked what was another chore I was good at, and Jesse said ironing his suits. She, in response, joked about having him send her a suit of his so he could see how good she is at ironing too. I rolled my eyes hard, but at least Jesse agreed that was weird. Last week, Jesse came home with a new meal she cooked. I told him I already cooked dinner and asked what he was going to do with the meal. He told me he was going to eat it for dinner. Not gonna lie, I was getting a bit irritated and he must have noticed because he said that he promised Nellie he'd eat it for dinner and that she asked him to take a pic of the empty plate later to confirm that he'd actually eaten it. I was baffled. Like, completely baffled at this. I told him one thing and one thing only. Told him that if he chose to eat Nellie's meal over the dinner that I cooked, then this would be the last time that I cooked for him. He started moaning about how I was being unfair and putting him in a rough place. He stalled and didn't give a clear answer until I saw him walk past me later when I set the table and prepared for dinner. That's when he put her meal in the microwave. I felt so awful, I almost cried. I then told him from now on I won't cook for him anymore since he made his choice. I obviously pissed him off because he went off on me calling me childish and pathetic to make this about my ego. I got up from my chair and told him that I owed him nothing and that he made his decision and so did I. He snapped and said that this was ridiculous and that Nellie was just doing a nice thing for him while my behavior was disgraceful and disgusting. He then went into the bedroom and I rushed after him, but he shouted, "Leave me the fuck alone." He then proceeded to shut the door and hasn't been speaking to me after that. His mom knew about the argument and called begging me to be more patient and not make any decisions I might regret later. She agreed that Nellie was overstepping and firmly believes that she's the problem and so I shouldn't be hard on her son. But my mother-in-law is incredibly biased, meaning in her eyes, her son is a saint who can do no wrong. So that's that. I feel like I overreacted and really messed it up by pushing him like that. Am I the asshole for telling my husband that I won't cook for him again if he chose to eat his coworker's meal over mine?
When I was 14, I had a best friend named Lucy, and we had one of those friendships where we were really close really quickly, which I now know is a red flag and usually a sign of a toxic friendship, but I was too young to know this then. Our favorite thing to do together was hang out at the mall. Our parents would let us go alone as long as we abided to one rule. We had to stay together at all times, and we were always pretty good about that. One night we were having a sleepover at Lucy's house and her Uncle Mike came over for dinner. Uncle Mike was pretty loud and goofy. He showed us like 8 magic tricks that night. I liked him, he was fun, but as I was helping clear dishes after dinner, I overheard Mike and Lucy's mom having a hushed conversation in the kitchen. She was like, "You've had too much to drink, why don't you just spend the night?" So Mike ended up sleeping over that night too. Right before going to sleep, Lucy's mom came into the bedroom, and she told us to remember to shut the bedroom door before falling asleep. When I asked Lucy why she said that, Lucy just shrugged and said, "I don't know." But we made sure the bedroom door was shut just like she asked. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the feeling of someone tickling my feet. So I was having a sleepover at Lucy's house and I woke up in the middle of the night to someone or something tickling my feet. I scream and then I hear shuffling. Lucy wakes up and she's like, "What's wrong?" And I tell her that something was tickling my feet, but she doesn't believe me. I'm like, "Well, why is the door open? We shut it before we went to sleep." And she goes, "Relax. Sometimes it happens because there's a draft in the house." And I tell her that I think it was her uncle who was tickling my feet and she goes, "Oh, come on, you're hallucinating." And honestly, at the time I had a bad feeling about Lucy's reaction. It felt like she was gaslighting me and I had no idea why. A few weekends later, Lucy and I are chilling at the mall on a Saturday afternoon. My parents let us go to the mall together alone, but their one rule is that we have to stay together the whole time. They call it the buddy system. So that day, Lucy's acting weird. She keeps looking around nervously and checking her phone. She says she has to go to the bathroom, and I'm like, "Okay, I'll go with you." Because we always go together, even if the other person didn't have to pee. And Lucy's like, "No, I'll go alone. I'll be quick." And I'm like, "No, I'll just go with you." And she snaps really aggressively, and she's like, "Just stay here." And then she spins around and sprints away from me. So Lucy's running away from me in the mall. I sprint after her. She's super fast. She rounds a corner and then I can't find her after that. I start crying. I have no idea why my best friend ran away from me. So I sit down on a bench in the mall. I'm still crying, really overwhelmed. Then I hear someone say my name. So I look up and it's Lucy's uncle, Uncle Mike. He asks what's wrong and I tell him. He's being super nice and comforting. And then he starts rubbing my back, which made me uncomfortable, but I don't say anything. Then he offers to give me a ride home. And I say, "No, I can just call my parents." And he goes, "Just let me give you a ride, come on." But the way he said it the second time gave me goosebumps. It was aggressive. Like he wasn't asking me, he was telling me. So I stand up and step away from him and say, "You're making me uncomfortable, I'm calling my parents." Mike glares at me, and then he says, "No one likes a tease." And he walks away. I told my parents what happened and they immediately called Lucy's parents. Apparently, Uncle Mike had taken a liking to me. And he found out that I was going to be at the mall that day with Lucy. And Mike paid her $100 to run away and leave me alone with him. He told Lucy that I liked him too and that she was being a good friend by giving us alone time. I never spoke to Lucy again after that.
So I'm an ER doctor and I got a story you're gonna love. Several years ago, I was fresh out of med school in my first couple months of residency. I went to see a patient who complained of lip swelling. He said about an hour prior to arrival, his lips started tingling and then they started swelling up. And when I saw them, they were swollen. They're about the size of your index finger. Now for you Orange County moms, that's not very big, but for him, it was. So I ordered some medications that we normally use to treat allergic reactions and I went to present it to my attending. He said, sounds like you're on the right track, but have the nurse get a surgical airway cart at the bedside just in case, because these can go downhill fast. So I did that. About 20 minutes later, the attending called me into the room and he said, hey, were his lips this swollen when you first saw him? I look over and said, oh my God. And they were easily double the size as when I first saw him. So now we're contemplating, should we intubate this guy or not, which means sedate him and place a tube down his airway to help control his airway. His oxygen saturations were a little on the low side, about 91, 92%. But otherwise, he seemed to be breathing okay, so there was a little bit of a debate. But however, after about 5 minutes or so, his breathing got more laborious, his oxygen saturations were now in the high 80s, and he said, I'm having trouble breathing. So we decided it's time to intubate. So I'm at the head of the bed and I got my blade ready to lift his tongue and pass a tube through his vocal cords. So I have the nurse give the medications to put him out and he goes out. The respiratory therapist comes over, puts a bag on his mouth and nose and starts to bag him to bring his oxygen levels up because they're going to fall when I go to intubate him. So he tries to bag him, but there's complete resistance. He can't get any oxygen in. And the nurse says he's starting to desat. We look up his oxygen saturations, go 85, 80, high 70s. The attending says, you got to tube him now, tube him now. So I take the blade, I lift his tongue and I look. I see nothing. Everything's complete mush, squished together. There's no pathway to his airway. I'm looking. The nurse says, his oxygen's falling. It's falling down. 60, 55. The attendant says, switch. So we switch. I'm now at the side of the bed. He's at the head of the bed. He takes the blade. He lifts and looks. He says, I can't see anything. He looks over at me and we both look up at the monitor. He's now down to 20%. The attendant says, you got to crike him. This means surgical airway. I've never done this before, only in the sim lab, not on a human, but I reach over, I grab the scalpel, I make an incision in his neck, just beneath his Adam's apple. I take my fingers, I spread the incision, I reach in, I grab his airway, I take the scalpel, I incise through his cricothyroid membrane, and then I put it down, I grab the tracheal hook, I hook his airway, I lift it up, I grab the cric tube, I pass it in, we secure the tube, the RT comes over, starts to bag him, we're all looking at the monitor, everybody in the room, 15%. 15%, bagging 15%, 30%, 45%, 65, 80. The attendant slaps his hand and says, now that's how you cric a patient. He was admitted to the ICU, walked out of the hospital 4 days later, perfect health.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy. I go to a very prestigious high school that is really hard to get into. The tuition there is really expensive too. People often say, you need to be both smart and rich to be admitted into this high school. Each year, the school gives scholarships to 50 students. These students are picked based on their academic or athletic achievements. I'm on the swimming team, but unfortunately, I don't have a scholarship. My dad pays a small fortune to the school. My best friends Jasmine and Emily are also on the team. Swimming requires discipline. We need to train regularly. And so we spend most of our days together. As if that weren't enough, we also love having slumber parties whenever we can. Emily doesn't have her own room, so we have them at either my place or Jasmine's. By the way, Emily gets financial aid. Unfortunately, her family is not doing so well. Of course, this doesn't stop us from being good friends, but I can feel that Emily is not too happy about not being able to host a party at her house. We were at my place when it all started. My parents had gone to our summer home, so we had the whole house to ourselves. We had so much fun doing the silliest things all night. We sat around in my room and talked until really late. Then Jasmine went to sleep in the living room, and Emily and I slept in my room. In the morning, I went into my bathroom. I put on my contact lenses. The night before, I'd put my ring right next to the lenses, but I realized it wasn't there anymore. I was sure I put it there. I looked around, but I couldn't find it. I was really upset because my mother had her own jeweler make this ring for my 15th birthday. I'm sure it's very expensive, but I didn't care about the money. It had huge sentimental value to me. I got dressed and went downstairs. Jasmine and Emily were making breakfast. I was just about to say that I couldn't find my ring, but I stopped. Emily slept in my room that night. In the morning, she used the bathroom before me. Emily is my best friend. It would never occur to me to suspect her. But if I said something, she might have misunderstood. That's why I didn't say anything. About 2 weeks later, we were at Jasmine's. Jasmine's family is one of the richest in the country. They have a gigantic house. Imagine, you have to call someone if you want coffee. A maid in a uniform brings it, like in the movies. As usual, we were having so much fun. We were laughing the whole time. At some point, Jasmine's mom came. "Honey, Elsa is going into labor. Do you want to go to the hospital with your dad?" she said. Elsa was Jasmine's dog, and she'd been at the animal hospital for some time waiting to deliver her babies. Jasmine was so excited. She said, "You guys should go to bed. I don't know when I'll be back," and left. It was too early to go to bed, and luckily we didn't have to train the next day. We decided to watch a show in bed. We needed a laptop for that. We began looking for Jasmine's laptop. "This room is bigger than our apartment. I wonder where it could be," Emily was saying. I told her, "You take a look around. I'll be back," and went to the bathroom.
Oh.
When I came back, Emily had found the laptop. We watched for a bit, but got bored. Elsa had the puppies. Jasmine sent us pictures of them. They were so incredibly cute. We hung out some more. "I have a headache. I'd better go to sleep," Emily said. She went to sleep in another room, and I waited for Jasmine. The next day, my mom and I were supposed to go shopping. She sent the driver for me super early. I had to wake Emily up. We dropped her off at home. Then I went to meet up with my mom. We shopped until 2 or 3 p.m. I was feeling so sleepy. When we got home, I wanted to lie down for a bit and immediately dozed off. When I woke up, I saw there was a text from Jasmine. "I want to talk to you about something," she wrote. I was surprised that she had sent it only to me. I was curious and called her right away. "You can't repeat what I'm about to tell you to anyone," Jasmine started. And the things she told me made my jaw drop. "Lately, I seem to be missing some things from my house every time we have a slumber party." "What kind of things?" I asked. "First, I lost one of my pearl earrings. Then a ring. Last night, my favorite bracelet was gone. Unfortunately, I think it could be Emily. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's her. I just wanted to check if you've lost anything recently so that I can be 100% sure it's her." I couldn't believe my ears. I was feeling dizzy. I was about to cry. "I only lost a ring. I couldn't find it after the last slumber party at our place," I said. "Is that it? Are you sure?" Jasmine asked. "Maybe other stuff as well, but I'm only aware of the ring," I said. I just remembered. I checked our chat group. Emily hadn't written anything, which was very unusual. "Did you say anything to Emily?" I asked Jasmine. I was so angry, but I held back. I only wrote, "Why?" She didn't respond. I got even more angry. "Don't you have anything to say?" I asked. But that message wasn't delivered. Obviously, she'd blocked me. She must have panicked when she figured I was onto her. After hearing all this from Jasmine, I cried for a long time. Was Emily a thief? How was she going to face us? And how should I be treating her? As these horrible thoughts were going through my mind, my phone started ringing. It was Emily. I didn't pick up because I didn't know what to say. A few seconds later, she texted, "What's up, girl?" I couldn't believe that she was acting like nothing had happened. Didn't she know Jasmine was going to tell me everything? Suddenly it hit me. If Emily stole from us, she wouldn't be calling me. Could Jasmine be wrong? Maybe there was another explanation for everything, but I couldn't ask Emily, "Are you a thief?" If she were innocent, she would be so hurt to be blamed for this. As I was thinking, I had an idea. There was indeed a way to find out if she really was a thief. I hatched up a little plan and put it into action. I called Emily half an hour later. I talked to her as if nothing had happened. But Emily sounded really upset. I asked her what was wrong. She said she had a problem at home. "Do you want to come to my place?" "My place?" "Elsa and her puppies have left the hospital. Jasmine is taking care of them. I'll have our driver pick you up. We can go to train together tomorrow morning," I said. Emily didn't want to come at first, but when I insisted, she said yes. If she could call me, it was obvious that she thought Jasmine didn't tell me anything. So I acted like I didn't know anything. We talked about this and that, nothing important. Thankfully, it wasn't a long night. We went to bed early since we had a train in the morning. I woke up way before Emily did. I had my alarm set. I got up. Earlier, I'd left one of my beautiful rings in the bathroom. I went in and checked. It was sitting right where I left it. I had also put a bracelet on the bedside table. It was also still there. You got my plan, right? I put my valuables in different places around the room before Emily came over. And then I made excuses to leave her alone in the room a few times. I woke up really early in the morning and checked all the jewelry I left around to test her. Everything was still there. If she'd wanted to steal, she could have. I was incredibly happy. I woke Emily up. "Girl, we need to go to Jasmine's. There's a misunderstanding that we need to fix," I said. Emily opened her eyes. There is no misunderstanding. I will never talk to Jasmine again. She's out of my life, she said. What in the world was happening? How could Emily talk like this? I had to tell her everything since we had to clear her name, and I did. Emily listened silently. When I was finished, she was quiet for some time. Then without even looking at me, she said, "So you tested me." She was offended, and rightly so. I didn't know what to say. Emily turned to me and said, "Lucy, Jasmine is the one who stole your ring. She's a kleptomaniac." This was the first time I'd heard the word kleptomaniac. Jasmine stole it? Why should she? What's a kleptomaniac? I asked. Emily grabbed her phone. She Googled it. Kleptomania is a psychological condition also known as impulsive stealing, she said. Then she read from a website. Kleptomaniacs are impulsive. They are unable to resist the urge to steal. They don't actually need the things that they steal. They feel a sense of relief at the moment of stealing, but they deeply regret their actions afterwards. While still in shock, I asked, "How do you know Jasmine has a stealing disorder?" Emily began telling her story. "We were looking for Jasmine's laptop to watch shows that night when we were at her place. I found it when you were in the bathroom. Do you remember?" I nodded yes. Emily went on. "I was just about to log into Netflix when something caught my eye on the tab that was open. It had something to do with me. I read it since I saw my name there. I even took a picture. Take a look." I took her phone. I zoomed in and read, "I can end my friendship with Emily because of her perfume. If you don't have any money, then don't use perfume. Thanks to her, I learned that cheap perfume smells like cat piss. The whole house stinks when she comes here. Even Elsa doesn't come into my room." I couldn't read the rest. I gave the phone back to her. Emily said, "This is an online diary site. This is Jasmine's diary. Unfortunately, she left her tab open. I saw it by accident. I wish I hadn't. I didn't like finding out that I smell like cat piss," Emily said. She was shaking with anger. She goes on to talk about how she's being treated for kleptomania. It turns out that they discovered she was a kleptomaniac when she was very young, but she was treated for it. Years later, when they found out she was stealing again, she went back to therapy. I was shaken by all of this. "I understand everything now, but what happened between you two?" I asked. I figured out Jasmine was lying to me when I listened to Emily's version. Emily was very upset, and she sent Jasmine the picture she took of her diary. Jasmine blocked her without answering, because she figured Emily knew about everything, including her kleptomania, which was also in that diary entry. The rest you already know. Jasmine called me up to hide what she had done and told me Emily was a thief. She must have thought I would cut all ties with Emily and never figure out that she was the real thief. Of course, the opposite happened. We stopped talking to Jasmine after that. When she saw me with Emily the next day, she realized that I knew. She turned around and ran. We are still in the same school and on the same team. We never talk to her, even though we see her all the time. She is too ashamed to look us in the eyes now.